Hello YouTubers and welcome to another tutorial of Hoboto aka Ice Cube. Today I'm going to show you how to pick a class and how to pick a race which suits you. So let's log in first. Create new character. Okay, I'm gonna make this really quick because otherwise I'll be at 20 or 30 minutes and YouTube doesn't allow that. So let's start out with classes. So first of all we have a warrior, which can be used for tanking and damaging. So warriors are great tanks versus single mobs like raid bosses or whatever. They can hold pretty good aggro. Um, and for DPS they have a very good talent which is called Titan's Grip, which allows you to have to wield dual-handed swords or dual-handed weapons anyway. So you can have two dual-handed weapons. So you can have two-handed weapons like swords, axes, maces, whatever. So which gives them a great advantage considering damage. Now let's move on to a Death Knight. Death Knight have like the same capabilities as a warrior. So the only difference is they have different spells and they can heal themselves. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So they can also tank, do good damage. So yeah, you just have to see for yourself. Now let's move on to Paladin. Paladin also can tank, do damage, and they can also be healers. They are pretty good healers if you ask me. But yeah, they're not basically meant to be healing, so they are just damaging overall or tanking. So they use spells and melee weapons, of course. So paladins are pretty good in PvP because they have a lot of stuns and their spells and damage is pretty overpowered. Now let's move on to shamans. Shamans are like the same as paladins, but they just have other spells, etc. So they use spells for damage, of course. They can also be healers, just like paladins. They can also be fully melee with the right talents, but they can also enchant their weapons with all sorts of stuff. So you just have to see for yourself, of course. Now let's move on to hunters. They use ranged as main damage. So they can also use melee, but they're not as good with it as ranged attacks. They also have pets, as you can see this bear at the background. So if you want to solo instances or leveling or whatever, these guys are pretty good. Like they can use their pet as tanks and do ranged damage themselves. Okay, so now let's move on to mages. Mages are fucking awesome. Sorry if I said it like that, but they are just freaking awesome. They have a great DPS rate. They do very much damage. If you have the right talents, of course. So yeah, in overall, mages great damage. Now let's move on to rogues. Rogues are known for their haste. They can hit really fast. They can use stealth to sneak up behind enemies and hit them in the back. They also have a lot of stuns and a lot of other features. So rogues are pretty good for damage. Now let's see, warlocks. Warlocks are pretty the same as hunters, but they use spells instead of ranged. So they have a lot of dots, which means damage over time. And they also have minions like this imp in the background. They have a lot of choice considering minions. They have void walkers, imps, yeah, well, a lot of minions, succubus, whatever. So you just have to pick what suits you. So warlocks, good DPS. Now let's move on to priests. Priests were actually made for healing, so that's why they are good at healing. If you ask me, they are one of the best healers out there. Better healers than paladins or shamans, if you ask me. They can also do damage, but they weren't created to do damage. So their damage isn't as good as a warrior, a dead knight, a shaman, whatever. So they're not as good as damage as everyone else. But great healing. Really, trust me, great healing. Now let's move on to druids. Druids have a lot of features. I mean, they can do damage with cat form, which looks like a rogue because they can stealth and use dual wield. Yeah, well, just like rogues actually. They can also tank with their bear form, which has a lot of armor and increased stamina and all of that shit. So druids, pretty good tanks. Druids can also be healers. They are, in my opinion, the second best healers because they have a lot of hots, which means healings over time. So they are very good for raid healing because they can heal a lot of people at the same time just with their hots, and they don't lose as much mana as a priest. So druids are have a lot of features. Now let's move on. So considering fractions, you can just pick what you like. So if you think this orc is fucking cool, you just pick a fucking orc. Considering races, so when you pick your fraction, alliance, or horde, you can well, you have to see what their abilities are. So you have to so you can pick a class. Oh my god. So for orcs, you have resistant to stun effects, which is great for PvP. Damage done by pets increase, so they are good for warlocks or hunters. Increased expertise with axes and fist weapons, so they're pretty good warriors as well. Undead. Undead are pretty useless if you ask me. They can only remove fear, sleep, and charm, which is good for PvP, I guess. Underwater breathing, they can breathe underwater, but who the hell cares? Resistance shadow damage, so yeah, there are pretty good abilities with undead, but if you think, oh my god, this guy is so cool, you just pick him. Now let's move on to Taurens. Taurens have increased health, so they are good warriors for tanking, dead knights, paladins, shamans, whatever, or druids, of course. And that's pretty much all they have, considering combat, of course. Now trolls. Berserk, increasing attack and casting speed, so they are good for practically everything. Regeneration increased, so they are pretty good, well, again for everything, so they have increased regeneration. So with a warrior you have increased health regeneration, and for casters you have increased mana regeneration. So now let's see what else. Increased critical chance with throwing weapons and bows. So if you're a hunter, you gotta have a bow with this guy because you have increased critical chance. Now let's move on to Blood Elves. Blood Elves can restore resources such as mana or energy. Okay, so the only combat thing they actually have is they can restore resources such as mana or energy. So if you want to be a Blood Elf, you either take Hunter or any class that uses mana. Now goblins. These guys are new from the Cataclysm, so they have pretty good abilities if you ask me. Can rocket jump forward, can launch rockets at enemies, receives a vendor discount, and can periodically summon a personal bank, haste increased, alchemy and potion healing increased. So they are pretty good. I mean, they are pretty fun to play because you have a lot of unique abilities. Considering combat abilities, these guys are pretty good for everything because they have increased haste. So they hit faster and their spells take less time to cast. Now let's move on to Alliance. Humans increase spirits, increase expertise with swords and maces. So if you want to be a human, you should take a caster because they have increased spirit, which allows you to have more mana regen. Now increase expertise with swords and maces. So if you're a warrior, you should have either swords or maces because they have increased expertise. Now dwarves, they take stone form, increased critical chance with guns. So for dwarf hunters, you should have a gun, not as a troll a bow. No, a gun for dwarves. Remind that. Increased expertise with maces. So yeah, Dead Knight Paladin, whatever. Make sure you have a mace with this guy. Night elves, more difficult to hit. So if you want to be a tank with a night elf, you're more difficult to hit. So that's pretty good if you ask me. Well, that's pretty much it. Well, faster movement while stealthed, so either a rogue or druid. Now gnomes, increased mana pool. So gnomes are good casters because they have an increased mana pool. Increased expertise with dagger and small swords, so they are also fit for rogues because they have increased expertise with daggers, etc., etc. Now let's move on to Draenei's. May heal self. Chance to hit with melee and spells increase. So they have a more chance to hit with spells and melee, just as it says. So they are good for kind of every class right here. Now let's move on to Worgen. Worgen is also new at Cataclysm expansion, so I don't think they're pretty cool because I seriously think this Worgen is pretty ugly, so I don't really like him. Let's see for the abilities. Critical chance increased, so they are good for everything right here because they have yeah, critical chance increase. You all know what that means. And that's pretty much it for Worgens. Now I have had all of them, so thanks for watching and hope you can pick something with this tutorial. So I'll probably see you next time with another tutorial, and goodbye.